My name is Róisín McAleer. I'm from Social Rights Ireland, and I'm very glad to be able to have this conversation with you, Barry. Thanks for agreeing to it. And the reason why I just wanted to, I suppose, talk to you a wee bit more is following the commemoration of Jim Lina at the weekend. So a number of Easter commemorations were happening, as you know, but we attended Jim Lina's and I listened, with great attention to your words. I thought your speech was a wee bit different to other speeches that I've heard over the weekend. And I just wondered, could we drill into it a wee bit more to find out actually some of the things that you said? I'd just like to get your own words and your own thoughts without it being scripted today, just to ask you about it. So is that okay with you?
Yeah, go ahead, Róisín. Yeah, no problem.
So it was very thought-provoking to hear, you sort of call on the Republican movement to do more. And I suppose the big question is, what more can we do? Like one of the first questions that came to mind whenever I was listening to it again is like you said at the start of the speech that, we're in a situation now, and I would want to know what are the conditions that, well, we know the conditions that we're in now. I think people are feeling very frustrated. We're feeling very stuck. Some people are feeling very powerless. People are going in all sorts of different directions and have different ideas. But what actually created the conditions that we're in now, where there is, where people are either directionless or going in all sorts of different directions?
Well, there's probably a lot of things in history, if you were to track it all back to the very start of the colonization of Ireland by the British, there's all sorts of sociological and psychological, no doubt, reasons why this type of thing happens. And it's probably not unique to Ireland as a colonized nation. It's probably unique to lots of former colonies around the world. Probably one of the more recent things that has happened, recent Republicans, without getting into a big long discussion or explanation, which I may not even be qualified to do. I mean, the first thing I would say is that in the recent past, the so-called 30-year war from the 1969 or 70s up till 1998 or shortly before it was politically a way too long, and it was that war was politically over maybe after the first 3 or 4 years. Now, all kinds of circumstances sort of interrupted to drive it on, like things like, internment, things like, Bloody Sunday, things like the hunger strikes, but behind all of that was a sort of the blood sacrifice notion that a lot of Republicans have, emanating from the 1916 Rising and Connolly and Pearse and all of that. So that's sort of seen as central and seen as it's also seen as a sort of a mark of honour with some justification. But the thing is, as a consequence of that, we have neglected, it's not that probably we wouldn't really want to, but we have neglected to build for taking power in Ireland, or at least in the beginning to really undermine power to ever get to that stage. We haven't built, we've been very neglectful in building within our communities, with our people, and our people understanding clearly what it is we want to do and where we want to go to. I mean, the 1922 counter-revolution, is a sort of an example of where Republicans were completely overwhelmed by imperialist power and defeated abysmally. And then it sort of became a resistance, almost, we're still here no matter about you, and we're going to be here, and it doesn't make any difference. And we spent an awful lot of time, maintaining our honour and maintaining the memory of those who had died. And we seem to have neglected doing a concrete analysis of how we would actually be in a position to usurp effectively power, British imperialism power, and now increasingly American and European power, and asserting ourselves within the population and becoming a force to be reckoned with, within people's everyday lives. There's a big danger that in all this sort of, blood sacrifice thinking and all of that you become irrelevant outside people's lives. Okay, it's an honourable thing to be doing and people respect it and all of that, but still have to go to work. They still have to pay their mortgage, and they still have to have a health service, and they still have to do all of these things. And that hasn't happened with us. We haven't followed that up. We sort of think that we'll do the fighting, and that's for somebody else. That's never going to threaten power. It's never going to. I mean, if we're talking about building, or if we're talking about calling for, and we should call for on a regular basis, a socialist republic, then we have to build for it. It's not going to happen, just out of the sky. That's not the way it works. And I mean, our enemies will work towards ensuring that it doesn't work that way.
And you did say that. That was one of the things I noticed in the speech. You said, it's not enough to call for a 32 socialist republic. We actually have to build one. And that can be, you kind of, for people like me, kind of going, how do we start, or where do we start? And like you said, it's easy to make speeches and call for it, but the harder challenge is actually to say, right, now I need to do something in my own community. I'm not powerless. So like you even said, you mentioned about it, we need a deeper dialogue among ourselves as Republicans around the strategic area of radical and revolutionary activism. So like, what would be the starting point for someone who is saying, okay, I'm not in the position to make that blood sacrifice, but I am in the position to work in my community? Where will I start?
Well, the starting point, oddly enough, probably is getting to understand why it's necessary to do this in the first instance, why radical and revolutionary politics is necessary as opposed to bourgeois electoralism. For what, you see it all the time when people build a well of support and start to, fill the streets with hundreds of thousands of people over whatever issue, be it the water protest, be it the 8th Amendment, be it whatever the issue would be. The next thing you hear the calls for, put somebody up as a councillor or as a TD or as an MLA or an MP. That seems to be the nadir of the thinking, that's where it's at. And it's understandable that too, because people, that's all people know. They haven't been explained what radical and revolutionary politics is actually about. It's the polar opposite of what we understand about politics. And then, of course, when they don't understand it, they feel threatened by it. And our enemies, of course, ensure that we feel threatened by it, because they start to call socialism all sorts of scares, and communism and reds under the bed, and the church joins in, and the media joins in, and our education doesn't mention it, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, how could people know what to do? But we can, and we do know that, when people come together and start opposing things and start campaigning for things, that things happen. I mean, that's how change happens in the world. That's how change has always happened in the world. It's humans that do it. So, we need to start with the social justice issues. We need to start with the issues that affect people's lives. It's as simple as that. It's as basic as that. Now, I know it's not that simple, and I know it's a difficult task, and you will meet opposition, and other political parties and whatever will see what you're at and try to undermine you and try to sort of take your place and co-opt you and do all of those things. But that doesn't say you don't do it. And I think we need to have within the major political groupings that are out there now outside of the counter-revolutionary Republicans, I think that, you know, they need to sit down and say, right, okay, who's going to do the issues in housing? Let's just start doing a bit of publicity and exposure on this. First of all, start doing it in our area where there's an issue. Start doing it with health. Start doing it with whatever, and get little committees together to demonstrate and to speak out about it, and get them maybe to manage a Facebook page or a social media page of whatever kind on these issues, and get them involved in it. Now, they need not necessarily be members of, shall we say, the 1916 societies exactly, but I mean, if they're being directed by the 1916 societies, then that's, you know, in a revolutionary and radical way, then that's a big start. But we come back to the thing that this has got to be understood, discussed through honest, comradely dialogue within the wider Republican family, to understand why and how this strategy is necessary. Because if you don't get the buy-in, as I said, of Republicans who are going to be involved in this, then it won't happen. In fact, it'll wither and die. So, I mean, what are we going to do? The first thing we need to do is learn why we need to use this strategy in the first instance, in my opinion.
Yeah. And that thing of how you learn is important too, you know, like in one way, the purpose of this video is even, you know, to have a discussion and to create, you know, education in a way. But I suppose the best way, well, for me anyway, or I see around me, is you learn through experience as well. The experience, and if you don't see it though in the first place, you know, I don't think we've no difficulty in convincing people about the erosion of healthcare, of the terrible conditions of housing, the cost of living. You know, that's for all Republicans, I think, understand that completely. We're subject to it. But it's understanding, the next bit is understanding what the revolutionary job is to do.
Well, in the case of housing, as an example, I mean, you're not looking for thousands of social housing being built by multinational companies, or being built by, or even regular housing, never mind social housing, being built by multinational companies for profit. I mean, what we're talking about here, and we're talking about our bottom line has got to be, what we're talking about here is public housing built by the government for the people, and that everybody in the island of Ireland has a house for into perpetuity for as long as they want. I mean, that's the difference between that and calling, you know, for the government to build more houses. We're not just talking about the government build more houses. We're talking about a different process. We're talking about a different system under which housing is controlled. And the same with health service. We're not talking about multinational companies coming in now and taking over our health service for profit. We're talking about a government managed, owned and controlled health service, controlled by the people, for the people, in every area, that is going to be there for them without, whether there's money or not. I mean, these things can't be based on whether there's profit in, you know, heart operations, or whether there's more profit in lung operations, or whether there's more profit in diabetes treatment, or whether it has to be based entirely on people's health and entirely on the human right of people having a proper, complete and total health service, physical and mental. I mean, we're talking about a different thing here altogether. We're not talking about reform. We're not talking about revisionism. We're not talking about patching things up. We're talking about a root and branch change within the system, and that people on the ground within community committees, community councils and assemblies have power to decide these things within their lives. I mean, that's where you want to get. You'll not do that tomorrow. Mm-hmm. But I mean, that's where you have to be aiming for. And if you're not, then you're going to go down the reform and revisionist road. And the same for electoral politics. I mean, if you think, or going into a parliament to think that you can change things and that you can suddenly, you know, turn the whole capitalist imperialist system around by your dedicated work. And I mean, a lot of councillors and TDs are very dedicated and committed, and MPs and MLAs, they're very but they can't. The system will not allow them to do what they really should be doing for the people, or really want to do for the people. They can't. So we have to take that power out of them systems into the people on the ground, and that the people are talking up or talking even down, better still, to power and saying, listen, this is what we want. It's not what you're going to give us or what you think we might need. It's what we want, and this is the difference. And okay, people say, but we can't do that. Well, yeah, you think you can't do it. You were told you can't do it. Your whole life told you can't do it, but that's not the truth. The reality is you can do it. It's only a matter of organising and building and educating in such a way to show people that that's possible. And small victories would help along the way. I mean, you said earlier there about, it's easy to be calling for socialist republic and all of that. Yeah, it is. And it's easy also to be calling to build for a social republic. I mean, it's easy to make that in a statement. The reality of doing it on the ground is not going to be simple. I'm not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting that it's a walk in the park. It's not. But like, we've spent 100 and whatever number of years it is since the counter-revolution in the 1922. We've nearly 100 years. And what have we to show for it? Like, we don't really have anything to show for it at this point. We're back to where we're nearly worse off than we were then. At least we had an army. At least we had people alive who wanted to fight on, who wanted to build for the socialist republic at the time. Now you don't even have that. It's more disparate. It's more broken up. It's more divided.
Although I do think, Barry, that what we're going through right now, when you look at Palestine, and this is, I suppose, the awful irony and tragedy, is that people are starting to question the why and the how. Like, why is this happening? And how come our government, they say our government, the government, can't do anything about it or won't do anything about it? So I think people for whom, they placed all of their trust in the electoral system are now starting to realise that it's irrelevant in many ways. Now, I'm not saying it needs to be thrown out altogether, like, reading that book, the ballot box or the streets. You just can't get rid of one straight away and overturn the whole thing.
Oh no! I mean, this is a building process. And yes, the whole Palestinian issue has certainly called into question, the authority of what we are taught is power and what we're told is power, so-called democracy, and the so-called world order. I mean, it clearly doesn't work, and it's clearly not working, and it was clearly never meant to work. That's the other bit that people don't realise. It was never meant to work. It's a red herring. Like, I mean, the issue is about the strength of capitalism and the strength of imperialisms throughout the world. That's what it's about. It's about markets. It's about profit, and that's the bottom line. I mean, and a lot of people know that, but they can't make the psychological leap. Say, well, we've got to change this, and we've got to get out there and start and work from the bottom up. It's difficult, and I mean, it's difficult for people naturally who always thought that, sure, Jimmy up the road or Bridget down the street, she'll sort it because she's a councillor, or she's a TD or an MP or an MLA or whatever. She's some kind of a person that'll get all this stuff sorted. And it's a myth perpetuated by the bourgeois electoral system that makes people think that something's going to happen. But the Palestinian genocide has definitely, begin to make people question what's happening here. But that will also happen then, you see, with, if we confront the housing issue in a revolutionary and radical way, or the health or any other issue for that matter, climate destruction even, then people will begin to learn from that. People will begin to say, all right, I didn't think that's what it meant. And it's through actions and activities on the directed actions and activities on the streets, towns, villages and town lands, that people begin to ask questions and begin to say, all right, so I thought if 1,000 houses was built every week that, we're all right. We're not. Well, it's something that can be done. If you look at the state of Kerala, in India, they with governments in place and all have spent since 1956 trying to build, decentralized democracy and involving people in local committees and assemblies. Now, they were in and out of government. The right wing put them out of government sometimes too. But I mean, it's not a simple task. I only tell you that by way of the fact that, even somebody who had government behind them it took them a long time to get anything. They have it now to a greater or lesser extent and have something in place now that should survive if it gets the proper treatment. But Republicans can do that. And Republicans have never been afraid to confront the system. That's the good thing about them. But they've never organised to take power. And they've never thought about it. And funny, people who have been in colonial situations are quite often afraid to talk about taking power because they see it as aligning themselves with the oppressive power. And that's not the case at all. But it's a syndrome. It's a well-known syndrome of countries that have been colonised or of peoples that have been colonised. But hopefully with time and dialogue and discussion and learning, we can change that, hopefully.
Well, this is the start of it, and I just want to thank you because we wouldn't have this conversation if you hadn't made that very important speech on Saturday at the graveside of Jim Lynagh. Thank you, Barry.
Thanks, Róisín. Thank you very much. Very much.